The notification sound had become like a heartbeat he dreaded hearing. Another withdrawal, another mysterious charge, another reason to check his banking app with the same dread most people reserved for medical test results. Kaelen Frost stared at his phone screen in the dim light of his downtown Chicago apartment, watching his checking account balance drop below 4 digits for the third time this month. The culprit was always the same: his girlfriend Maya's spending spree at some boutique he'd never heard of, or a dinner at a restaurant that cost more than his weekly groceries. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 3 years of this dance, and he was finally hearing the music for what it really was: a funeral march for his financial future. Kaelen had always been methodical about money. Growing up in a blue-collar household in Milwaukee, where his father worked double shifts at the steel mill and his mother clipped coupons like they were treasure maps, he learned early that every dollar had a job to do. His first paycheck from bagging groceries at 15 went straight into a savings account. By 25, he had built a respectable nest egg working as a project manager for a construction firm, living below his means in a modest one-bedroom apartment, driving a reliable Honda Civic that he'd bought used and maintained himself. Then Maya Chen entered his life like a hurricane dressed in designer clothes. They met at a networking event downtown. She was magnetic in the way that beautiful women often are when they know their power, floating between conversations in a dress that probably cost more than his monthly rent. She worked in marketing for a luxury brand, lived in a high-rise near the lake, and spoke about money the way other people discuss the weather, casually, as if it were infinite and renewable. The early months were intoxicating. Maya introduced him to restaurants where the wine list read like a mortgage payment, weekend trips to places he'd only seen in magazines, and a lifestyle that felt like playing dress-up in someone else's life. She paid for everything initially, waving away his offers to split bills with a laugh that sounded like champagne bubbles. "Don't worry about it, babe," she'd say, sliding her black card across marble restaurant tables. "I make good money. Let me spoil you." And spoil him she did. For 6 months, Kaelen lived in a bubble where money seemed to grow on trees, and every evening ended in some new adventure that cost more than his father made in a week. He should have known it wouldn't last. He should have asked more questions when Maya started making casual comments about being between bonuses, or when her apartment lease renewal became a topic she danced around with increasing creativity. The shift happened so gradually that he almost didn't notice it. Maya started suggesting they split dinner bills, then asking if he could cover drinks, then wondering if he minded picking up groceries since he was so much better at budgeting. Each request came wrapped in compliments about his financial responsibility and gentle teasing about her own terrible money habits. "You're so good with numbers," she'd say, nuzzling against his shoulder while they watched Netflix on his couch. "I'm hopeless with budgets. Maybe you could help me get better at saving?" Kaelen, raised to be helpful and flattered by the idea that someone as sophisticated as Maya needed his guidance, agreed without hesitation. He set up a shared budgeting app, created spreadsheets breaking down their combined expenses, and started tracking their shared costs with the same attention to detail he brought to construction projects. What he failed to track was how quickly shared became his responsibility. The first red flag should have been the credit cards. Maya mentioned them in passing, usually after a particularly expensive dinner or shopping trip, always with the same practiced laugh. "I probably shouldn't have bought those shoes," she'd say, holding up bags from stores Kaelen had never set foot in. "But they were on sale, and you know how I am with sales. I'll just put it on the card and deal with it later." Later never seemed to come. The credit cards multiplied like rabbits, each one a different color of plastic doom. There was the Nordstrom card for clothes, the Sephora card for makeup, the Amazon card for essentials, and a handful of major credit cards that she used for everything else. Maya treated them like monopoly money, swiping with the carefree attitude of someone who believed that minimum payments were a sustainable long-term strategy. "Credit cards are just a tool," she explained when Kaelen expressed concern about the growing pile of statements on her kitchen counter. Rich people use credit all the time. It's about leveraging your money, not being afraid of it. Kaelen, who had never carried a balance on his single credit card and paid it off religiously each month, found himself slowly drawn into Maya's financial web. It started with small things. She needed help with her rent one month because her commission check was delayed. Could he spot her just this once? She'd pay him back as soon as her bonus came through. Then her car needed repairs she hadn't budgeted for, and her credit cards were maxed out. Could he put it on his card and she'd transfer him the money next week? Next week stretched into next month, which stretched into as soon as I get my tax refund, which eventually became a vague promise to pay him back somehow that hung in the air between them like smoke. The insidious part wasn't the amounts, at first. $50 here, $200 there, amounts that felt manageable when spread across weeks and justified by Maya's promises and genuine seeming distress. She was always apologetic, always grateful, always certain that her financial situation was temporary and that she'd be back on her feet soon. "I don't know what I'd do without you," she'd whisper against his chest after he'd agreed to cover yet another expense. "You're literally saving my life right now. I promise I'll make it up to you." But temporary became permanent, and the amounts grew larger. Rent became a regular contribution from Kaelen's account. Groceries were automatically his responsibility. When they went out, which was still frequent despite Maya's supposed financial difficulties, the check would slide across the table to him with the same inevitability as pravity. The tipping point came on a Thursday evening in February, when Maya announced over Thai takeout that he had paid for that she needed help with her credit card payments. "I'm drowning, Kaelen," she said, her voice breaking just enough to hit the right note of vulnerability. "I tried to handle it myself, but the interest is killing me. I can barely afford the minimums, and they're not even touching the principal." She pulled out her phone and showed him her banking app, scrolling through a list of credit card payments that looked like a small mortgage. The numbers made his stomach drop. She owed nearly $30,000 across 7 different cards, with interest rates that ranged from 18 to 29%. "How did it get this bad?" he asked, trying to keep the judgment out of his voice. Maya's eyes filled with tears. Real ones, he thought, though he was starting to lose the ability to tell the difference. It happened so slowly, a charge here, a payment there, and suddenly everything snowballed. "I know it's my fault. I know I should have been more careful, but I can't fix this alone." She reached across the table and took his hand, her fingers cold and trembling. "I was thinking you could add me as an authorized user on one of your cards, just temporarily, until I can get a debt consolidation loan. I'll only use it for the payments, I swear, just to break the cycle." Kaelen stared at their joined hands, feeling the weight of 3 years together, all the promises she'd made, all the times she'd sworn things would get better. He thought about the weekend trips they'd taken, the expensive dinners, the shopping sprees that had been funded by those very credit cards. He thought about his own carefully maintained credit score, his emergency fund that had been slowly depleted by emergency loans to Maya that were never repaid. "Maya," he said carefully, "adding you to my credit cards isn't going to solve the underlying problem. You need to address your spending habits." Her face changed, the vulnerability replaced by something harder. "I'm not asking you to solve my problems. I'm asking for help from my boyfriend, the person who's supposed to love me and support me. I do love you, I do support you, but I can't enable behavior that's destroying your financial future." Enable? The word came out sharp, cutting through the restaurant's ambient noise. "Is that what you think this is? You think I'm some kind of addict?" Other diners were starting to look their way. Kaelen lowered his voice. "I think you have a spending problem that you're not addressing. Adding you to my credit cards will just move your debt to my name without fixing anything." Maya pulled her hand away and leaned back in her chair, studying him with eyes that had gone cold. "So that's it? Your girlfriend is drowning, and you're going to watch her sink because you're worried about your precious credit score?" "That's not what I said." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. It's what you meant. She picked up her purse, a leather bag that cost more than Kaelen's monthly car payment. I guess I know where I stand now. She left him sitting at the table with 2 plates of pad thai and a check that, as always, became his responsibility. That night, lying alone in his bed, Kaelen stared at the ceiling and tried to figure out when he'd become someone's financial life preserver. He thought about the gradual erosion of his savings, the way his carefully planned budget had become a joke, the stress that now accompanied every notification from his banking app. He thought about his parents, who had never owned a credit card and paid for everything with cash or check, who would be horrified to know their son was drowning in someone else's financial chaos. Maya didn't speak to him for 3 days. No texts, no calls, no acknowledgement that he existed. On the 4th day, she showed up at his apartment with red eyes and a bottle of wine that probably cost more than his electric bill. "I'm sorry," she said before he could even let her fully inside. "I was wrong to put that pressure on you. I was scared and desperate, and I took it out on the one person who's been trying to help me." She looked genuinely contrite, standing in his doorway with her shoulders slumped and her usual confidence nowhere to be seen. "I don't want to lose you over money. You mean too much to me." Kaelen felt the familiar tug of sympathy, the desire to comfort and protect that had gotten him into this situation in the first place. He stepped aside and let her in, watching as she moved through his apartment with the easy familiarity of someone who belonged there. "I found a financial counselor," she continued, settling onto his couch with the wine bottle cradled in her lap. "Someone who specializes in debt consolidation and budgeting. I have an appointment next week." "That's good," he said, meaning it. "That's a real step forward." "I want to fix this, Kaelen, not just for me, but for us. I want to be the kind of partner who contributes instead of taking all the time." She opened the wine with the corkscrew from his kitchen, pouring 2 glasses with the practiced ease of someone who had done this many times before. "I know I can't ask you to trust me right now. I have to earn it back, but I'm going to prove to you that I can change." They spent the evening talking about budgets and financial goals, making plans for how Maya could tackle her debts systematically. She seemed genuinely engaged, asking thoughtful questions and taking notes on her phone. For the first time in months, Kaelen felt hopeful that they could navigate this together. The honeymoon period lasted exactly 2 weeks. The first sign that nothing had actually changed came in the form of a delivery notification. Kaelen was at work, reviewing blueprints for a new office complex, when his phone buzzed with a text from Maya. "Hope you don't mind, I had something delivered to your place since I won't be home. Just some work clothes I needed urgently. Thanks, babe." When he got home that evening, there were 4 large shopping bags from Nordstrom sitting outside his door. He carried them inside and set them on his kitchen counter, staring at the receipt that had spilled out of one of the bags. The total was over $800. Maya arrived an hour later, breezing through the door with Chinese takeout and the kind of bright smile that usually preceded bad news. "You saw the packages," she said, not quite making it a question. "I know it looks bad, but I can explain." $800, Maya. "I had a presentation this week for a major client. I literally had nothing appropriate to wear. My other work clothes are too old, too tight, or too casual. This was an investment in my career." She began unpacking the bags, laying out blouses and skirts and dresses with the reverence of someone arranging artwork. "If I nail this presentation, it could lead to a promotion. The commission alone would pay for these clothes 10 times over." Kaelen picked up one of the price tags, a small piece of paper that cost more than his weekly grocery budget. "Did you go to the financial counselor?" "Yes, and she was great, really helpful. She agreed that sometimes you have to spend money to make money. She said career investments are different from frivolous spending." Something in Maya's tone made him suspicious, but he let it slide. He wanted to believe that she was making progress, that the counselor had given her tools to distinguish between necessary and unnecessary purchases. Over the next month, those tools apparently classified quite a few things as necessary. New shoes for networking events, a handbag that was essential for client meetings, makeup and skincare products that were part of maintaining a professional image. Each purchase came with a detailed explanation of its career importance and a promise that the investment would pay off soon. Meanwhile, Maya's contribution to their shared expenses continued to dwindle. She was always between paychecks, or waiting for commission, or dealing with some unexpected expense that had decimated her budget. Rent, groceries, utilities, dinner dates, they all somehow became Kaelen's responsibility, while Maya's career investments multiplied in his closet. The breaking point came on a Saturday morning in April. Kaelen was making coffee when his phone rang, Maya's name lighting up the screen with the kind of urgency that suggested either an emergency or another financial crisis. "Babe, I need a huge favor," she said without preamble. "I'm at the mall with Jessica and I found the perfect dress for the company gala next week. It's designer, but it's marked down from $1,500 to $800, which is basically like making money." "Maya, I know, but my cards are maxed out and my account is overdrawn from that stupid overdraft fee. Could you just transfer me the money? I'll pay you back as soon as my commission check comes in." Kaelen set down his coffee cup and walked to his window, looking out at the street below where normal people were going about their Saturday morning routines without being asked to fund someone else's designer dress purchases. "No," he said quietly. "What?" "No, I'm not transferring you $800 for a dress." There was a pause, filled with the background noise of whatever upscale mall Maya was shopping in. When she spoke again, her voice had taken on the edge he'd learned to recognize as the prelude to a fight. "It's not just any dress, Kaelen. This is for a work event, a mandatory work event where I need to look professional and put together. You know how important my career is to our future." "Our future seems to involve me paying for everything while you spend money we don't have on clothes you don't need." "That's not fair. I contribute plenty to this relationship. When? When was the last time you paid for dinner, or groceries, or your half of anything?" He could hear Maya moving, probably stepping away from her shopping companion to have this conversation with less of an audience. "I can't believe you're doing this to me right now. I'm standing in a store, Jessica's waiting, and you're going to humiliate me over $800? I'm not doing anything to you. I'm choosing not to enable your spending addiction." "It's not an addiction." Her voice rose, probably drawing stares from other shoppers. "It's an investment in my career, which benefits both of us. The money I make from looking professional at this gala will pay for this dress 100 times over." "Then put it on layaway and buy it with that money when you make it." "You're being ridiculous and cruel. What am I supposed to tell Jessica?" "Tell her you can't afford an $800 dress." The silence stretched long enough that Kaelen wondered if Maya had hung up. When she finally spoke, her voice was ice cold. "Fine, I'll figure it out myself, but don't expect me to forget this, Kaelen. When I needed you most, you chose money over me." The call ended with a sharp click, leaving Kaelen standing in his kitchen with his cooling coffee and the distinct feeling that he'd just failed some kind of test. But for the first time in months, his banking app showed a balance that hadn't been depleted by someone else's emergency. For the first time in months, he felt like he could breathe. Maya didn't speak to him for the rest of the weekend. No texts, no calls, no explanation of how she'd solved her dress crisis or whether she'd found another way to attend her supposedly mandatory work gala. Kaelen found himself enjoying the silence, using his Saturday to meal prep and balance his checkbook without worrying about surprise expenses or urgent financial requests. On Monday morning, his phone buzzed with a text that made his blood pressure spike. "Thanks for nothing. Had to borrow money from my dad for the dress. He thinks my boyfriend should be taking better care of me. Hard to argue with that logic." Kaelen stared at the message, feeling a familiar mixture of guilt and frustration. Maya had a talent for making her financial irresponsibility into his moral failing, turning every boundary he tried to set into evidence of his inadequacy as a partner. He typed and deleted several responses before settling on something simple. "Glad you found a solution." Her response came immediately. "Is that all you have to say?" He turned off his phone and went to work, spending the day focused on concrete problems with measurable solutions. Foundation issues, structural calculations, permit applications. Challenges that could be solved with knowledge and effort rather than endless negotiations with someone who viewed his wallet as community property. That evening, Maya was waiting in his apartment when he got home. She must have used the spare key he'd given her months earlier, back when sharing access to his space felt like a romantic gesture rather than a security risk. "We need to talk," she said from his couch, where she sat surrounded by shopping bags like a general surveying conquered territory. "How did the gala go?" he asked, hanging up his jacket and noting that she'd apparently solved more than just the dress crisis. "It was fine. Great, actually. I made some excellent contacts." She gestured to the bags around her. "I also did some shopping afterward. Retail therapy, you could call it." Kaelen counted at least 6 bags from stores he recognized as expensive. "With what money?" "My dad gave me his card, said I should buy myself something nice since my boyfriend isn't interested in taking care of me properly." The manipulation was so blatant that Kaelen almost admired its audacity. Maya had managed to turn his refusal to fund her shopping habits into a family intervention about his fitness as a partner. "Your dad doesn't know our financial situation. He knows enough. He knows you make decent money and that I've been struggling. He knows a real man would step up and help his woman instead of nickeling and diming her to death." Maya stood up and began unpacking her purchases, laying out clothes and accessories with the same theatrical flair she'd used with the work clothes. "He said if you're not willing to invest in our relationship, maybe I should find someone who is." There it was, the threat that had been lurking beneath every financial argument they'd had. "Shape up or ship out, pay up or lose me. Prove your love with your credit card or watch me find someone who will." "Is that what you want?" Kaelen asked. "Someone who will bankroll your shopping addiction without question?" Maya's hand stilled on a silk blouse that probably cost more than his electric bill. "I want a partner who supports my dreams and goals, who sees my success as our success and invests in our future together. I want a partner who lives within her means and doesn't treat me like a personal ATM." The words hung in the air between them, finally giving voice to what Kaelen had been feeling for months. Maya turned to face him. Her expression cycled through surprise, hurt, and anger before settling on cold calculation. "So that's what you think of me? That I'm using you for money? I think you've convinced yourself that spending money you don't have is an investment and that anyone who questions that logic doesn't love you enough. And I think you've become a penny-pinching control freak who's more interested in his bank balance than his girlfriend's happiness." They stared at each other across his living room, surrounded by the evidence of Maya's latest spending spree and 3 years of accumulated resentment. Kaelen felt something shift inside him, a click like a door closing or a decision being made. "You're right," he said quietly. "I am more interested in financial stability than buying your happiness with money I don't have." Maya blinked, clearly expecting him to back down or apologize as he had so many times before. "Kaelen, I'm done, Maya. I'm done being your emergency fund. I'm done having my financial goals derailed by your spending habits." She took a step toward him, her expression shifting back to vulnerability mode. "You don't mean that. You're just frustrated. We can work this out." "How? By me continuing to pay for everything while you promise to change? By me adding you to my credit cards so you can destroy my financial future along with your own? That's not what I'm asking for." "It's exactly what you're asking for. You want someone who will fund your lifestyle without question and make your financial problems disappear without consequences." Maya's mask finally slipped, revealing the anger that had been simmering beneath her practiced vulnerability. "You know what? Fine. Maybe I do deserve someone who can afford to take care of me properly. Maybe I deserve someone who doesn't make me feel like a burden every time I need help. You deserve someone who enables your addiction to spending money you don't have. And I deserve someone who doesn't view me as a walking credit line." Maya began stuffing her purchases back into their bags with sharp, angry movements. "This is really how you want to end things? Over money? This is how things are ending. Over respect, over honesty, over you treating our relationship like a financial transaction where I pay and you receive. She paused in her packing, looking at him with something that might have been genuine if it hadn't been mixed with so much calculation. I loved you, Kaelen. You loved what I could provide. There's a difference. Maya finished packing her bags and walked to the door, turning back for one final shot. I hope your precious budget keeps you warm at night. I hope you find someone who can afford you, he replied, because I can't. The door closed with a soft click, and Kaelen was alone with his intact bank account and the strange sensation of being able to breathe freely for the first time in months. He walked to his kitchen counter, pulled out his phone, and opened his banking app. The balance stared back at him, depleted but stabilizing, like a patient recovering from a long illness. Tomorrow, he would change his account passwords, remove Maya's access to his Netflix account, and begin the process of rebuilding his financial future without someone else's emergencies constantly derailing his progress. But tonight, he would sit in his quiet apartment and remember what it felt like to say no and mean it, to set a boundary and hold it, to choose his own financial security over someone else's shopping addiction. Tomorrow would be the beginning of learning to live without the constant anxiety of wondering what crisis would drain his account next. Tonight was just the end of being someone else's personal ATM. The relief was overwhelming. The silence in Kaelen's apartment felt different after Maya left. Not empty, but clean. Like the difference between a house that's been abandoned and one that's been thoroughly aired out after a long illness. He sat on his couch, looking at the indentation where Maya used to curl up with her laptop, shopping for things she couldn't afford with money she didn't have. His phone buzzed. A text for Maya's number. "You'll regret this." He stared at the message for a long moment, then blocked her number. Not out of anger, but out of necessity. He'd learned enough about addiction to know that enablers needed to cut off contact as much as addicts needed to avoid their triggers. The next morning brought an unexpected test of his resolve. Kaelen was pouring his first cup of coffee when someone knocked on his door. He opened it to find Jessica, Maya's shopping companion and closest friend, standing in the hallway with the kind of expression usually reserved for interventions. "We need to talk," she announced, brushing past him into his apartment without invitation. Jessica had always been Maya's enabler-in-chief, the friend who encouraged every purchase and validated every financial decision. She made good money as a pharmaceutical sales rep and seemed to believe that everyone else should live according to her budget rather than their own. "Maya's devastated," she began without preamble, settling into his armchair like she was preparing for a long siege. Jessica had always been Maya's enabler-in-chief, the friend who encouraged every purchase and validated every financial decision. She made good money as a pharmaceutical sales rep and seemed to believe that everyone else should live according to her budget rather than their own. "Maya's devastated," she began without preamble, settling into his armchair like she was preparing for a long siege. Jessica had always been Maya's enabler-in-chief, the friend who encouraged every purchase and validated every financial decision. She made good money as a pharmaceutical sales rep and seemed to believe that everyone else should live according to her budget rather than their own. "Maya's devastated," she began without preamble, settling into his armchair like she was preparing for a long siege. Jessica had always been Maya's enabler-in-chief, the friend who encouraged every purchase and validated every financial decision. She made good money as a pharmaceutical sales rep and seemed to believe that everyone else should live according to her budget rather than their own. "Maya's devastated," she began without preamble, settling into his armchair like she was preparing for a long siege. Jessica had always been Maya's enabler-in-chief, the friend who encouraged every purchase and validated every financial decision. She made good money as a pharmaceutical sales rep and seemed to believe that everyone else should live according to her budget rather than their own. "Maya's devastated," she began without preamble, settling into his armchair like she was preparing for a long siege. Jessica had always been Maya's enabler-in-chief, the friend who encouraged every purchase and validated every financial decision. She made good money as a pharmaceutical sales rep and seemed to believe that everyone else should live according to her budget rather than their own. Maya's devastated. She began without preamble, settling into his armchair like she was preparing for a long siege. Jessica had always been Maya's enabler-in-chief, the friend who encouraged every purchase and validated every financial decision. She made good money as a pharmaceutical sales rep and seemed to believe that everyone else should live according to her budget rather than their own. Maya's devastated. She began without preamble, settling into his armchair like she was preparing for a long siege. Jessica had always been Maya's enabler-in-chief, the friend who encouraged every purchase and validated every financial decision. She made good money as a pharmaceutical sales rep and seemed to believe that everyone else should live according to her budget rather than their own. Maya's devastated. She began without preamble, settling into his armchair like she was preparing for a long siege. Jessica had always been Maya's enabler-in-chief, the friend who encouraged every purchase and validated every financial decision. She made good money as a pharmaceutical sales rep and seemed to believe that everyone else should live according to her budget rather than their own. Maya's devastated. She began without preamble, settling into his armchair like she was preparing for a long siege. Jessica had always been Maya's enabler-in-chief, the friend who encouraged every purchase and validated every financial decision. She made good money as a pharmaceutical sales rep and seemed to believe that everyone else should live according to her budget rather than their own. Maya's devastated. She began without preamble, settling into his armchair like she was preparing for a long siege. Jessica had always been Maya's enabler-in-chief, the friend who encouraged every purchase and validated every financial decision. She made good money as a pharmaceutical sales rep and seemed to believe that everyone else should live according to her budget rather than their own. Maya's devastated. She began without preamble, settling into his armchair like she was preparing for a long siege. Jessica had always been Maya's enabler-in-chief, the friend who encouraged every purchase and validated every financial decision. She made good money as a pharmaceutical sales rep and seemed to believe that everyone else should live according to her budget rather than their own. Maya's devastated. She began without preamble, settling into his armchair like she was preparing for a long siege. Jessica had always been Maya's enabler-in-chief, the friend who encouraged every purchase and validated every financial decision. She made good money as a pharmaceutical sales rep and seemed to believe that everyone else should live according to her budget rather than their own. Maya's devastated. She began without preamble, settling into his armchair like she was preparing for a long siege. Jessica had always been Maya's enabler-in-chief, the friend who encouraged every purchase and validated every financial decision. She made good money as a pharmaceutical sales rep and seemed to believe that everyone else should live according to her budget rather than their own. Maya's devastated. She began without preamble, settling into his armchair like she was preparing for a long siege. Jessica had always been Maya's enabler-in-chief, the friend who encouraged every purchase and validated every financial decision. She made good money as a pharmaceutical sales rep and seemed to believe that everyone else should live according to her budget rather than their own. Maya's devastated. She began without preamble, settling into his armchair like she was preparing for a long siege. Jessica had always been Maya's enabler-in-chief, the friend who encouraged every purchase and validated every financial decision. She made good money as a pharmaceutical sales rep and seemed to believe that everyone else should live according to her budget rather than their own. Maya's devastated. She began without preamble, settling into his armchair like she was preparing for a long siege. Jessica had always been Maya's enabler-in-chief, the friend who encouraged every purchase and validated every financial decision. She made good money as a pharmaceutical sales rep and seemed to believe that everyone else should live according to her budget rather than their own. Maya's devastated. She began without preamble, settling into his armchair like she was preparing for a long siege. Jessica had always been Maya's enabler-in-chief, the friend who encouraged every purchase and validated every financial decision. She made good money as a pharmaceutical sales rep and seemed to believe that everyone else should live according to her budget rather than their own. Maya's devastated, she began without preamble, settling into his armchair like she was preparing for a long siege. Jessica had always been Maya's enabler-in-chief, the friend who encouraged every purchase and validated every financial decision. She made good money as a pharmaceutical sales rep and seemed to believe that everyone else should live according to her budget rather than their own. Maya's devastated, she began without preamble, settling into his armchair like she was preparing for a long siege. Jessica had always been Maya's enabler-in-chief, the friend who encouraged every purchase and validated every financial decision. She made good money as a pharmaceutical sales rep and seemed to believe that everyone else should live according to her budget rather than their own. Maya's devastated, she began without preamble, settling into his armchair like she was preparing for a long siege. Jessica had always been Maya's enabler-in-chief, the friend who encouraged every purchase and validated every financial decision. She made good money as a pharmaceutical sales rep and seemed to believe that everyone else should live according to her budget rather than their own. Maya's devastated, she began without preamble, settling into his armchair like she was preparing for a long siege. Jessica had always been Maya's enabler-in-chief, the friend who encouraged every purchase and validated every financial decision. She made good money as a pharmaceutical sales rep and seemed to believe that everyone else should live according to her budget rather than their own. Maya's devastated, she began without preamble, settling into his armchair like she was preparing for a long siege. Jessica had always been Maya's enabler-in-chief, the friend who encouraged every purchase and validated every financial decision. She made good money as a pharmaceutical sales rep and seemed to believe that everyone else should live according to her budget rather than their own. Maya's devastated, she began without preamble, settling into his armchair like she was preparing for a long siege. Jessica had always been Maya's enabler-in-chief, the friend who encouraged every purchase and validated every financial decision. She made good money as a pharmaceutical sales rep and seemed to believe that everyone else should live according to her budget rather than their own. Maya's devastated, she began without preamble, settling into his armchair like she was preparing. Mrs. Chen had always been kind to him, though he'd sensed a certain reserve in her interactions. Now her voice carried a weight that suggested difficult conversations ahead. "I wanted to thank you," she continued, surprising him, "for everything you've done for Maya over the past year. Mrs. Chen, I'm not sure what Maya told you about our breakup, but she told me you refused to help her anymore, that you chose money over love." There was a pause, filled with the sound of Mrs. Chen's carefully controlled breathing. "What she didn't tell me was how much you'd already helped, how much of your own money you'd spent trying to solve her problems." Kaelen wasn't sure how to respond. He'd never discussed Maya's financial situation with her parents, partly out of respect for her privacy, and partly because he'd hoped she would handle it herself. "Maya's father and I have been dealing with her spending problems since she was 16, Mrs. Chen continued. "Credit cards we didn't know about, store accounts opened in our name, overdraft fees that drained her college fund. We thought she'd outgrown it when she got her job and moved out. I didn't know. We didn't tell anyone. We kept thinking it was a phase, that she'd learn from the consequences. But there never were any consequences, because there was always someone willing to bail her out. First us, then her college boyfriend, then you." The conversation was taking a turn Kaelen hadn't expected. He'd assumed Maya's parents would blame him for abandoning their daughter, not thank him for enabling her. "We love our daughter," Mrs. Chen said softly, "but we've learned that helping her avoid the consequences of her choices isn't actually helping her at all. It's just teaching her that someone else will always clean up her messes." What happens now? Now she faces reality for the first time in her adult life. No boyfriend to pay her bills, no parents willing to co-sign loans, no friends who can afford to carry her indefinitely. She'll either learn to live within her means or face bankruptcy. The words were matter-of-fact, but tinged with the sadness of a mother watching her child struggle with problems she couldn't solve. I called to tell you that you did the right thing, even though it was probably the hardest thing. Maya needs to learn that love isn't measured by someone's willingness to fund her lifestyle. After Mrs. Chen hung up, Kaelen felt something he hadn't experienced in months: validation. Not the hollow validation that came from enabling someone's destructive behavior, but the real validation that came from making difficult decisions based on principles rather than emotions. That afternoon brought another unexpected visitor. This time it was David, Maya's ex-boyfriend from college, the one who'd apparently been her financial safety net before Kaelen took over the role. "I heard about you and Maya," David said when Kaelen opened the door. "Mind if I come in?" David was everything Kaelen wasn't: tall, polished, old money in a way that showed in his posture and his perfectly fitted clothes. He looked like someone who'd never worried about money because he'd never had to. "I wanted to warn you," David said once they were seated in Kalen's living room. "Maya's going to try to get you back." "I don't think so. She seemed pretty clear about moving on to someone who could afford her." David laughed, but there was no humor in it. "That's what she told me, too. Right before she spent 6 months trying to convince me that breaking up with her was the biggest mistake of my life." "What happened?" "She cycled through every manipulation technique in the book: apologies, promises to change, financial emergencies that only I could solve, threats of self-harm if I didn't take her back. When none of that worked, she started dating my fraternity brother to make me jealous." David leaned back in his chair, studying Kaelen with the look of someone who'd learned hard lessons about love and money. "The thing about Maya is that she genuinely believes her own narrative. She really thinks she deserves to be taken care of, that her happiness is more important than other people's financial security. It's not conscious manipulation as much as it is complete self-absorption." "How did you finally get free?" "I changed my phone number, blocked her on everything, and told mutual friends not to pass along messages. It took about a year before she moved on to someone else." David paused. "That someone else was you." The implication hung heavy between them. Maya hadn't chosen Kaelen for his potential or his character. She'd chosen him because he was the next available mark, someone with enough resources to fund her lifestyle and enough compassion to feel guilty about saying no. "I should have warned you earlier," David continued, "but I figured you'd figure it out on your own, and I was too relieved to be free to want to get involved again. What made you come forward now?" "Because Maya called me last night, said she was single again, and wondered if I wanted to get coffee and catch up. When someone's been your financial nightmare for 2 years, you don't forget their voice." David stood up, straightening his expensive jacket. "She's going to tell you that she's changed, that losing you made her realize what really matters. She's going to promise to pay you back and swear that she's learned to budget. Don't believe any of it. I won't. Because the only thing Maya learned from your relationship is that some people take longer to drain than others." That evening, as if summoned by David's warning, Maya texted from a different number. "I know you blocked me, but I need you to know that I'm getting help, real help this time. I've enrolled in a debt management program, and I'm seeing a therapist who specializes in financial issues. I was wrong to put so much pressure on you, and I want to make it right." Kaelen stared at the message, feeling the familiar tug of hope and guilt. This was exactly what he'd wanted to hear for months: acknowledgement of the problem, concrete steps towards solution, recognition of how her behavior had affected him. His finger hovered over the reply button for a long moment before he deleted the message without responding. The next morning brought another text. "I know you're angry, and you have every right to be, but I'm not giving up on us. What we had was too special to throw away over money. I'm going to prove to you that I can change." Delete. Day 3. "I've been thinking about what you said, about me treating you like an ATM. You were right, and I'm ashamed of how I behaved. I want to pay you back every penny I owe you. I've made a list of everything, and I have a plan." Delete. Day 4. "I miss you so much it physically hurts. I wake up every morning thinking about texting you, and I go to sleep every night wishing I could call. I know I have to earn your trust back, but please don't shut me out completely." By the end of the week, Maya had progressed from contrition to bargaining to anger, exactly as David had predicted. "I can't believe you're being this stubborn. I'm trying to apologize and make things right, and you won't even give me a chance to explain. This isn't the man I fell in love with." "Fine. If you want to be petty and ignore me, that's your choice. But don't come crawling back when you realize what you lost. I hope you're happy with your boring, lonely life. I hope your bank account keeps you warm at night." Kaelen blocked the new number and spent Saturday afternoon changing all his passwords, removing Maya from his streaming accounts, and updating his emergency contacts to remove her information. It was like performing surgery on his own life, cutting out the infected parts so the healthy tissue could heal. Sunday brought unexpected peace. For the first time in months, Kaelen woke up without immediately checking his phone for financial emergencies or urgent requests for money. He made coffee at his own pace, read the news without anxiety, and planned his week around his own priorities instead of someone else's crisis. He drove to his parents' house in Milwaukee for dinner, something he'd been putting off for weeks because Maya always had some conflict or emergency that prevented the trip. "You look different," his mother said when she hugged him hello. "Lighter." "I feel lighter." His father, a man of few words but keen observation, studied him over dinner. "You break up with that girl." "Maya." "Yes." "Good. She had expensive taste and empty pockets. Never a good combination." His mother elbowed his father but didn't disagree. "We were worried about you, honey. You seemed stressed every time we talked to you." "I was." Kaelen helped himself to more of his mother's pot roast, comfort food that cost less to make than one of Maya's typical lunches. "I was trying to solve problems that weren't mine to solve." "Money problems?" his father asked. "Among other things." His parents exchanged a look that spoke of 40 years of marriage and hard-earned wisdom about relationships and responsibility. "Your grandfather used to say that you can't save someone from drowning if they keep swimming back out to deep water," his mother said gently. "Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is let them face the consequences of their choices." Kaelen felt tears prick his eyes, relief mixing with grief for the relationship he'd thought he wanted and the future he'd imagined. "I feel guilty for giving up on her." "You didn't give up on her," his father said firmly. "You gave up on being her personal bank. There's a difference." Driving home that evening, Kaelen felt something shift inside him. The guilt was still there, but it was quieter now, overshadowed by a growing sense of clarity about what he wanted from life and relationships. He wanted a partner who contributed rather than consume, someone who saw challenges as opportunities for teamwork rather than opportunities for rescue. He wanted conversations about dreams and goals that didn't always end with price tags and payment plans. Most importantly, he wanted to build a life with someone who valued financial security as much as he did, someone who understood that love wasn't measured by dollars spent but by respect given and received. Monday morning brought a new routine. Kaelen woke up early, worked out at the gym he'd been paying for but rarely using, and stopped for coffee at a place he liked rather than the expensive shop Maya had preferred. The extra money in his budget felt strange at first, like finding cash in an old jacket pocket. At work, his project manager noticed the change immediately. "You seem more focused lately," Tom said during their weekly check-in. "Whatever's going on in your personal life, it's good for your work." It was true. Without the constant low-level stress of financial anxiety, Kaelen found himself more creative, more decisive, more willing to take on challenging projects. He'd forgotten how much mental energy had been consumed by worrying about money and managing someone else's financial chaos. That afternoon, his bank called with a routine question about his account. The representative, probably trained to identify opportunities for additional services, mentioned that his savings rate had improved significantly over the past month. "Are you interested in discussing investment options for your excess cash flow?" she asked. Excess cash flow. Kaelen almost laughed. 6 months ago, the idea of having extra money to invest would have seemed like fantasy. Now it was a conversation he could actually have. "Send me some information," he said. "I'll take a look." For the first time in over a year, Kaelen was thinking about the future in terms of what he could build rather than what he could afford to lose. The feeling was intoxicating. That evening, as he sat in his quiet apartment reviewing investment brochures and planning his financial comeback, Kaelen realized that Maya had actually given him a gift. Not intentionally, but by showing him what he absolutely didn't want in a partner, she'd helped him clarify what he did want. He wanted someone who understood that money was a tool for building security and opportunity, not a substance to be consumed for temporary happiness. He wanted someone who could distinguish between needs and wants, someone who could delay gratification in service of long-term goals. Most importantly, he wanted someone who saw him as a partner in building a shared future, not as a resource to be exploited for funding a lifestyle. Maya had taught him the difference between being needed and being used, between supporting someone's dreams and subsidizing someone's delusions. The education had been expensive, but the knowledge was invaluable. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. For a moment, he wondered if Maya had found yet another way to contact him. But the message was from Jessica. "Maya's moving back in with her parents. Thought you should know. She couldn't make rent." Kaelen stared at the message for a long moment, waiting for the guilt or the urge to rescue to kick in. Instead, he felt only a quiet sadness for someone who'd had every opportunity to learn from her mistakes and had chosen not to. He deleted the message without responding and went back to his investment research, planning for a future that belonged entirely to him. 6 months after Maya moved back to her parents' house, Kaelen received an invitation that made him smile. His coworker Tom was getting married, and the engagement party was being held at a rooftop venue downtown. The kind of place Maya would have insisted they attend with a new outfit and expensive dinner beforehand. Instead, Kaelen put on a suit he already owned, drove his reliable Honda, and arrived with a gift he could actually afford. The freedom felt revolutionary. At the party, he found himself in conversation with Sarah, Tom's fiance's sister. She was a CPA who worked for a nonprofit, someone who understands the value of money because she helped organizations stretch every dollar to maximum impact. When she mentioned that she and her boyfriend were saving for a house down payment, Kaelen felt something he hadn't experienced in years: compatibility. "It's taking forever," Sarah laughed, "but we're determined to put down 20% so we avoid PMI. My boyfriend thinks I'm crazy for being so conservative, but I've seen too many people get underwater on mortgages because they borrowed too much." Kaelen nearly choked on his drink. A woman who understood mortgage insurance and debt-to-income ratios, who made financial decisions based on math rather than impulse, who saw delayed gratification as wisdom rather than deprivation. "That's actually brilliant financial planning," he said, and meant it. "Most people think it's boring. My ex used to say I was too uptight about money." Your ex was an idiot. Sarah's laugh was genuine, unforced, the sound of someone who didn't need to perform her emotions for an audience. What about you? Are you one of those guys who thinks budgeting is unromantic? I think budgeting is the most romantic thing two people can do together. It's planning a future based on reality instead of fantasy. The conversation flowed naturally from there, covering everything from retirement planning to travel goals to the kind of financial partnership they both hoped to find. Not once did Sarah mention designer handbags or investment pieces or the need to maintain a certain image. She talked about money the way Kaelen did, as a tool for building security and opportunity rather than a substance for immediate consumption. When the evening ended, they exchanged numbers with the easy confidence of two people who'd found something rare and valuable. Not passion or chemistry, though those were present, but fundamental compatibility about life's most practical concerns. Over the following weeks, their relationship developed at a pace that felt sustainable rather than intoxicating. Coffee dates where they split the check, walks in free parks, home-cooked dinners that cost less than one of Maya's appetizers. Sarah appreciated thoughtfulness over expense, planning over spontaneity, substance over flash. When the evening ended, they exchanged numbers with the easy confidence of two people who'd found something rare and valuable. Not passion or chemistry, though those were present, but fundamental compatibility about life's most practical concerns. Over the following weeks, their relationship developed at a pace that felt sustainable rather than intoxicating. Coffee dates where they split the check, walks in free parks, home-cooked dinners that cost less than one of Maya's appetizers. Sarah appreciated thoughtfulness over expense, planning over spontaneity, substance over flash.
I love that you actually read restaurant menus instead of just ordering the most expensive thing, she said during one of their early dates. My last boyfriend seemed to think that spending more money automatically meant better quality. Kaelen had learned to recognize these comments as windows into Sarah's past experiences, just as his own observations about her financial sensibility revealed his history with Maya. They were both recovering from relationships with people who viewed money as something to be consumed rather than conserved. "I love that you suggested we cook dinner together instead of going out again," he replied. "Most people seem to think staying in is somehow less romantic than spending money we could save." 3 months into their relationship, Sarah met his parents. The contrast with Maya's single, uncomfortable visit was stark. Where Maya had seemed bored by his father's stories about work and his mother's questions about her career, Sarah engaged genuinely with both of them. She asked his father about construction techniques, complimented his mother's cooking, and offered to help with dishes without being asked. "She's lovely," his mother said, while Sarah and his father discussed foundation problems on older homes. "And she's real. No pretense, no performance, just genuine interest in the people around her." "She's also financially responsible," Kaelen added quietly. "She has a budget, savings goals, no credit card debt. She thinks about money the way you and Dad taught me to think about it." His mother squeezed his hand. "Then she's perfect for you." 6 months after that first meeting at the engagement party, Kaelen and Sarah moved in together. The process was a revelation in healthy financial communication. They discussed rent splitting, utility responsibilities, grocery budgets, and shared expenses with the matter-of-fact efficiency of two people who understood that money conversations were relationship conversations. "I think we should keep separate accounts for personal expenses," Sarah suggested while they reviewed their combined budget. "That way you can buy your tools and gadgets without me judging, and I can get my books and coffee without feeling guilty." "As long as we're both contributing fairly to shared expenses and meeting our individual savings goals," Kaelen agreed. "Obviously, what kind of person would expect their partner to subsidize their personal spending?" The question was rhetorical, but Kaelen felt a familiar pang of memory. Maya had not only expected him to subsidize her personal spending, she'd been offended when he'd suggested any alternative arrangement. Living with Sarah taught Kaelen what financial partnership actually looked like. When her car needed expensive repairs, she didn't panic or immediately turn to him for rescue. Instead, she reviewed her emergency fund, got multiple quotes, and made a decision based on her own resources. When she couldn't afford the full amount, she asked if he wanted to split the cost in exchange for sharing the car more often. "I can cover the whole thing myself," she explained, "but it would wipe out most of my emergency fund. If you're willing to contribute half, we could treat it as our car instead of just mine. What do you think?" The proposal was logical, fair, and completely free of manipulation or emotional pressure. Kaelen could say yes or no based on his own financial situation and preferences, without being made to feel guilty or unloving for either choice. "That makes sense," he said. "Let's do it." When Kaelen's promotion came through, bringing a significant salary increase, Sarah's reaction was pure joy without a hint of calculation about what it meant for her own access to resources. "We should celebrate," she said, hugging him in their kitchen. "But let's also talk about what you want to do with the extra money. More savings, investment contributions, that vacation fund we discussed?" She didn't suggest shopping sprees or lifestyle inflation or ways to spend the increase before he'd even received his first larger paycheck. She thought about the additional income the way he did, as an opportunity to accelerate their shared financial goals rather than an excuse to expand their spending. A year after moving in together, they bought a house. The process showcased everything that was healthy about their financial relationship. They'd saved the down payment together, researched neighborhoods based on their actual budget rather than their aspirational lifestyle, and chosen a mortgage payment that left room for other goals. I love that we can afford this house easily instead of stretching for something that would make us house poor, Sarah said as they signed the final papers. Having financial breathing room feels so much more secure than having the nicest house we could possibly qualify for. Kaelen thought about Maya's apartment with its high rent and premium location, how the cost had stressed her budget and contributed to the credit card debt that eventually consumed their relationship. Sarah had chosen financial peace over prestige, and the wisdom of that choice felt like a gift he received every day. 2 years after the engagement party where they'd met, Kaelen and Sarah attended Tom's anniversary celebration. The same venue, many of the same people, but Kaelen felt like a completely different person than the man who'd attended alone and uncertain about his relationship future. "You two seem really solid," Tom observed during a quiet moment at the bar. "It's nice to see you with someone who appreciates what you bring to the table, instead of just seeing you as a provider." The comment stung slightly, a reminder of how visible his financial stress had been during the Maya years. But it also highlighted the peace that came with being valued for his character rather than his credit limit. That evening, as they drove home in their shared car to their jointly owned house, Sarah brought up a conversation they'd been approaching gradually for months. "I've been thinking about engagement rings," she said casually, the way she might mention thinking about vacation destinations or kitchen renovations. Kaelen's heart rate increased, but not from panic or financial anxiety. Sarah's approach to major purchases was always methodical and transparent. "What kind of thoughts?" he asked. "Well, I know we've talked about getting married eventually, and I know you're probably thinking about proposing sometime in the next year or two. I wanted you to know that I don't need anything expensive or flashy. I'd rather we put money toward our retirement accounts or the mortgage principal than spend thousands on a ring I'll wear once in a while." The relief was overwhelming. No hints about specific designers, no carefully curated Pinterest boards left open on shared computers, no manipulative conversations about what engagement rings symbolize about a man's commitment level. "I've actually been saving for a ring," he admitted. "I was worried about finding something you'd love that wouldn't derail our other financial goals." "Show me the budget," she said practically. "We'll figure out something perfect within whatever amount makes sense for our overall financial picture." 3 months later, Kaelen proposed, with a ring they'd chosen together, purchased with money he'd saved specifically for that purpose, at a price point that felt celebratory rather than financially stressful. Sarah's reaction was pure joy, untainted by any evaluation of the ring's cost or comparison to her friend's engagement experiences. "It's perfect," she said, admiring the simple setting and quality stone they'd selected after researching jewelers and comparing options. "And I love that we stayed within budget while still getting something beautiful." Their wedding planning process reflected the same financial wisdom that characterized everything else about their relationship. They set a realistic budget, prioritized the elements that mattered most to them, and made decisions based on their values rather than external expectations or pressure. "I'd rather have a smaller wedding that we can pay for ourselves than a bigger wedding that puts us in debt," Sarah said when they discussed options. "Starting our marriage without financial stress feels more important than having the perfect centerpieces." Standing at the altar a year later, Kaelen looked at Sarah and felt the deep satisfaction that came with finding someone who shared not just his values, but his understanding of how to live those values daily. Someone who measured love in respect and partnership rather than dollars spent. In his pocket was a prenuptial agreement they'd both insisted on, not out of mistrust, but out of mutual respect for the financial independence they'd each worked to build. They were choosing to combine their lives and resources from a position of strength rather than need, partnership rather than rescue. During their first dance, Sarah whispered in his ear, "I'm so glad we waited until we were both financially stable to do this. It feels like we're building something together instead of one of us saving the other." Kaelen thought about Maya, somewhere across the city, hopefully learning the lessons that financial consequences were designed to teach. He felt no anger toward her anymore, only gratitude for the education her presence in his life had provided. She'd taught him the difference between being needed and being used, between supporting someone's dreams and subsidizing someone's delusions. Most importantly, she'd taught him to recognize the difference between a partner and a dependent, between love and financial exploitation. The knowledge had been expensive, but it had led him to Sarah, and that made every painful lesson worthwhile. As they swayed to music in a reception hall they could easily afford, surrounded by friends and family who celebrated their wisdom as much as their love, Kaelen realized that the best relationships weren't built on grand gestures or expensive displays of affection. They were built on daily choices to respect each other's resources, support each other's goals, and face financial realities together rather than separately. He was no longer anyone's personal ATM, and never would be again. Instead, he was Sarah's partner in building a future that belonged to both of them, funded by both of them, and designed to benefit both of them equally. The difference felt like the difference between drowning and swimming, between being consumed and being fulfilled. And every morning when he woke up next to someone who valued his contribution rather than his bank account, Kaelen remembered why financial boundaries weren't just about money. They were about self-respect, mutual respect, and the kind of love that grew stronger over time instead of more expensive. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.